What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Raw Prospect Podcast, episode 157. We are back approaching midnight Sunday, March 19th. An exciting night in Austin, Texas, where I am bringing this podcast to you with my co-host, as always, Mr. Emmy Nixon. How are you tonight, Emmy?
I am great, man. I am so great. If you're watching on YouTube, you're probably wondering why is his face not showing on the screen, and why is his audio sound like he's talking into an iPhone? Well, for one, I'm over at my dad's place. I don't have my setup with me, so we're making do with what we can right now, and let's have a great episode. I'm excited.
Yeah, exactly. It was an exciting night, a historical night in some respects.
Yep.
And that is where we're going to start tonight. We're not going to waste any time, excuse me, as it is midnight now. We're going to start with Texas getting to the Sweet 16 for the first time in 15 years. This, I think, I don't think it was a huge exaggeration coming in to say that this was the biggest basketball game Texas had played in like the last 15 years coming into tonight with everything that was at stake. I mean, you're talking about not making the Sweet 16 in over half a generation. 15 years, that's a long time. And Penn State, let me just say this real fast. Micah Shrewsbury, who was an assistant under Brad Stevens with the Boston Celtics, their head coach, he's doing a fantastic job. And I'm sure that program, with Jalen Pickett, who's probably going to go to the NBA, if I had to guess, he's a stud, as I mentioned, but still only the second best Pickett in the state of Pennsylvania. We'll get to that in a little bit. I think Micah Shrewsbury is a rising star in the coaching game, and you got to give a lot of credit to Penn State. I mean, they were fantastic. They were spreading Texas out and really getting to their shot, especially late in that second half. But we're here to talk about Texas. So real fast, just credit to Penn State. They were a really good team. And I should mention, go check out our episode earlier today where we talked about NFL free agency in the first round of March Madness and gave our reactions to that. We talked about, and you brought up, the concept of momentum and how important it is. And I think both of these teams, Texas, winning the Big 12 tournament, getting momentum late in the season, being a really good Kansas team twice, although they were knocked out tonight by Arkansas. In Penn State, they were one of the hotter teams in the country, along with Duke and some other teams, getting all the way to the Big Ten championship game against Purdue, which Purdue did win, but then advancing as far as Purdue did, in the tournament, and giving a really good team in Texas, who at this point, the way that they're playing and with the depth that Texas has and the experience that they have, I don't think there are too many other teams left in the tournament that you can say are definitively better than the Texas Longhorns right now. But that's another conversation we can have another time, maybe later this week when we start talking about the Sweet 16. Just real fast, Emmy, your reaction to the game. What do you think won Texas the game? How did you feel throughout the game? Just your overall thoughts.
Well, I think this game encapsulates everything that it means to win a March Madness game. And what I mean by that is everything is so intense from start to finish. Like both teams know it's win or go home. It's like a game 7, except both of these teams already. It's like a game 7 between two teams that are experienced in game 7s. There's like a certain feeling of both teams knowing the moment and embracing the moment, and both teams were making shots, and to see that performance from Dylan Dessou and to still just barely scrape by, um, it was nerve wracking. That's for sure. I think Penn State is with their 3-point shooting. They caused Texas a lot of headaches with how they ran their offense. But those are the games you got to win in the tournament if you want to call yourself a contender. And they got it done tonight. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, absolutely. There were a couple key moments, and to me, the moment that comes to mind is with about 5 minutes left in the game, Penn State made a run, and they took the lead 58-55. And as a coach, that doesn't have a whole lot of experience in the tournament. In his time at Fresno State, and his time, decade in the head coaching game, only made the tournament once and did not win a game previously in the tournament as Rodney Terry in his career, although he has experience as an assistant coach alongside, Chris Beard's team last year and the Rick Barnes teams. He didn't have a whole lot of experience head coaching in this type of pressure situation. And I think that timeout, once they went down by 3, to sort of settle the guys down, give them some confidence going into their next offensive possession, draw up something that would get them an easy basket, settle, stop the Penn State momentum right there where it was, because it was really looking dim at that point. I mean, not dim in like the respect that Texas can't win this game. I mean, they were only down by 3 with about 5-ish minutes left. But if you don't stop the bleeding right there, then we could be singing a totally different tune right now, right? So I think that timeout, that's what like championship level coaches do. Because you're not going to go through the entire NCAA tournament as a top seed like Texas is and not face some adversity. And this has been a theme all season long. I've said it over and over and over again. This team's resilience is unbelievable. And it was situations like tonight. This is why you have all that experience, period. For situations like that, where you face some adversity late in the game. And it's also a credit to the Big 12 Conference. I mean, this is what playing those teams, night after night in the Big 12, this is what it prepares you for. And so I think that it's an overall credit to Rodney Terry for taking that time out at the right time, settling the guys down, drawing up a play for right now, your best player in Dylan Dessou. An amazing performance. Like that is a performance, I think, no matter how far Texas ends up going in this tournament, whether they lose in the Sweet 16, which I think it can still be deemed a successful season at that point, or they make a run to Houston and get to the Final Four. I mean, that performance by Dylan Dessou, 28 points and 10 rebounds on 14 of 20 shooting.
Yep.
I mean, that's a performance Texas fans are going to remember forever. I'm sorry. Like that's some all-time stuff right there. And Kevin Durant, LaMarcus Aldridge took to Twitter to tell you about it. Like that's stuff that those guys did back in 2007 on the last Sweet 16 run. So I don't know. We have a lot to get to. I don't want to spend too much time on Texas. So I'll just kind of wrap it up by saying I think tonight is like a program defining win. It's a stepping stone for the Texas program. And I'll end with it's a huge win. I mean, this is the most successful Texas season. And I said it on my Twitter as well. They've had in, half a generation. And we're extremely happy about that. And their experience and their resilience showed. But at this point, as I said before on our previous podcasts, which you guys should check out, like and subscribe. At this point, I don't see how, unless it's like an unbelievable hire that you have in your back pocket, like a Jay Wright or somebody that you just cannot possibly like turn down the opportunity to hire. Like one of those guys, like an all-time great coach, or maybe a guy that's coaching in the NBA, like a Billy Donovan that's been there, done that as well. I don't see how you don't hire Rodney Terry at this point.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the thing that I'll say to wrap this up is every year in March Madness, all the teams always have their players drilled over the course of the entire season over these late game situations. And all it really comes down to is execution. Every team has a play they go to. Every team has, practiced, been in the situation in regular season games or whatever the case may be. And from Texas's standpoint, a team that, over the course of the last 5 years has always had great defensive teams. But to have the offensive execution that they showed in the closing minutes of that game, I think that really puts the cherry on top of everything. I think that validates, the moves they've made to go into the transfer portal to get some of these guys. And it really makes things come all together in perspective. And it, like you said, it's an all-time night for the program.
Absolutely. Enjoy this win if you're a Texas fan. Like till about Tuesday, really don't take this for granted because for Texas as a program, this is something that doesn't happen very often. Like Duke fans and Carolina fans and Kentucky fans, like the Blue Bloods, even Villanova fans at this rate, and some other programs too, like Gonzaga, they feel like that's where they belong. Like year after year after year, like that is not the standard. And for Texas, I think a program that has the donor base that they do, that has the coaches and the resources that they do to be able to recruit and the NIL money to go into the transfer portal and get guys that fit their system, I think this sets the bar from here on out. Like Texas should be in the Sweet 16 with all the resources that they have, no matter who the coach is. And I think Rodney Terry has proven now that he can get you to this point. I think this is like raising the bar just a little bit for the program. So that's where we'll wrap it up. Super exciting. I'm definitely going to enjoy this till about Tuesday, maybe even Wednesday until I start looking ahead to the Sweet 16 matchup. But with that, we'll move on. We're going to talk some NBA. On the theme of basketball, we're going to talk some NBA. We have 6 teams that we're going to talk about today. And we're going to talk about, we deem these teams to be really interesting for one reason or the other, going down the last, month of the regular season. And the playoff race is heating up, especially in terms of seeding, right? And we picked 6 teams that we're going to talk about their best and worst case scenarios. And so I'm going to pull up the list. I didn't make lower thirds for each team, but I have the list right here. And I can just start with you. Let's start with, I think, a really interesting conversation, and that be the Sacramento Kings.
Yeah, Sacramento, man, every single test that needed to be passed throughout this season, they've passed it with flying colors. I mean, first it was showing they could win on the road consistently. They've been able to do that. Then it was doing it for a long period of time, being able to beat tough teams, beat contending teams even, and they've done that as well. So with this Kings team, I think we're at a stage now where it's time to really consider where this team is really at and what the expectation should be and what this ceiling could be, because the ceiling could be very high, maybe higher than some people may think, considering where this Western Conference is. Obviously, as always, it's going to come down to matchups, as like it always does. But I think for the Kings, when discussing their ceiling and their floor, I think the ceiling is the Western Conference Finals. I think that might be a hot take, or it might be a bit baffling considering where that franchise has been for the past 15 plus years. But I think you look at that team and what they've been able to do offensively, and the pressure that they put on defenses night after night with the pace they play with and how efficient they are in the half court with their, Sabonis dribble handoffs and all the things that they do to put pressure on defenses. I think they do all those things at an elite level. Um, Now, with that being said, though, there are certain matchups where I wouldn't pick them. There are a lot of matchups where I wouldn't pick them to win, but at the same time, I do give them a fighting chance just because of how elite their offense is. It is truly elite. Like, there's no question about it.
Absolutely. And not only are they elite as they have the number one offensive rating in the NBA. They're statistically, it feels like we have one of these teams every year now, or at least for the past couple years. They're a historically great offensive team in the regular season. I mean, and they're efficient. Now, you talked about it. It's a 16-year playoff drought, which is going to come to an end. They had the league's, well, as of earlier this week, they had the league's best record since the All-Star break. I don't know if that still stands as of tonight, but a couple days ago it did. And they're beating the teams that ultimately they are competing with and will be competing with come playoff time potentially. They beat the Clippers twice. They've beaten the Knicks and the Suns, all with winning records since the All-Star break. And their defense hasn't necessarily been all that good, allowing 119.4 points per 100 possessions, the fourth worst as of earlier this week since the All-Star break. But their offense just remains ridiculous, and it's efficient. They actually there's 15 players with an effective field goal percentage of 64% or better on at least 75 attempts since the All-Star break, and 3 of them are on the Kings. Malik Monk, Kevin Werther, and Domantas Sabonis. So they're an incredibly efficient offense. My question remains on the defensive side of the ball, and typically, in my experience watching the NBA, a younger team like this has to go through, has to get and acquire those playoff scars.
Yeah.
That's typically how it works. We don't necessarily see that huge jump in the first year where they go all the way to the Western Conference Finals. But I truly believe that with um, with the guys that they have and the job that isn't it
Mike Brown.
Mike Brown is doing, they can absolutely make a run to the Western Conference Finals. Can they get out of the West? Probably not. But they can absolutely get to the Western Conference Finals. And I think their worst case scenario is they just get a bad matchup in the first round. And they make it a competitive series. Like it'll go 6 or 7 games because they'll have the home court. And that offense is really, really tough to stop. But if they get an experienced team that's been there, done that in the playoffs, coming out as like a 7 seed with some all-star power, I think potentially getting ousted in the first round is probably the worst case at this point. But in
Yeah,
a tough series.
I agree. I think the West is so strange because you have perennial superstars in the 7 to 10 range in the conference. You have LeBron James and Anthony Davis lurking in LA, and then you have Luca, Kyrie. However you may feel about Kyrie, he's great at basketball. He's a borderline superstar, I'd say. And then, of course, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and that entire crew in Golden State. So, with that being said, I think it's hard to really say how they'll fare in a playoffs setting against those guys with all the experience they have. But I think they will put up a fight 100%. They're talented enough to at least take any series they play in to 6 games.
Absolutely. Let's talk about the Lakers. I'll start with you on this one, just because they're right now sitting 34 and 37, 11th place in the West. So they wouldn't quite be in the play-in as of tonight. But they're only a half game back of the Jazz and only a half game back of the 8 seed right now. So they could easily still be up there in the play-in tournament, and I expect that they will be. What do you think the ceiling is for the Lakers?
It's really tough. To me, I think the ceiling is. I think it would be fair to say it's probably the same as the Kings Western Conference Finals, but at the same time, there's just always that twinge of should I discount LeBron James? Like a healthy LeBron James. That's the thing. You know, with LeBron James being 38, it's easy to discount it as, he won't get back into rhythm in time. He's gonna be, coming back healthy here with 8 to 10 games left, and it won't be enough time. But at the same time, though, it's still LeBron James, and you put LeBron James and Anthony Davis on the court together with good shooting and just any type of subsequent talent that you know complements them, then you have a fighting chance against anyone. So, with that being said, I think my ceiling for the Lakers would be to win the West, and that's you know it's so crazy because that would have felt ridiculous about a month ago.
Yeah. Look, Anthony Davis, every time that I've watched the Lakers since the All-Star break, he has been like fantastic. He
Yeah,
has been their anchor on both ends of the floor, with or without LeBron James on the court, in my opinion. And the additions that they made at the trade deadline enable them. And we talked about this on our Western Conference Tiers episode, which you should go check out as well. I think with Jared Vanderbilt, what he brings, and not even having D'Angelo Russell for much of this stretch, his ability to shoot the ball, like that off-ball guard that typically does well with LeBron James if they just accept their role. If LeBron is even close to healthy, and Anthony Davis, and I know it's knock on wood, like they have to be on the court together in order to reach like even the Western Conference Finals.
sure.
But if they are on the court together and Anthony Davis brings that same intensity that he has over the past month or so, because I think he's been really, really good. With the new versatility that they have defensively, like bringing Mo Bamba off the bench, having Jared Vanderbilt as like an energy guy, a guy that can switch in the pick and roll, guard, uh, multiple positions, having some shooting with Beasley and D'Angelo Russell. the passing and the basketball IQ and the overall greatness of a LeBron James, even though he might not be ultimately 100%. And then Anthony Davis, who was like an all-time draft prospect coming out and still can get it done. That is a team you do not want to see if they make it out of the playing tournament. If all things, fit together, and that's a big if. So I do think that given what they have in their versatility now and the ways that they can win basketball games, I do think their ceiling is at least getting to the Western Conference Finals and taking that series pretty deep, like to 6 or 7 games. I hesitate to say they can get to the finals. I don't want to sleep on LeBron James, but it's just like with everything that's happened, I just can't I have to see it to believe it
Right.
because LeBron's injury, it's happening right now where LeBron isn't quite the guy he once was. He's still really, really great. He's the NBA's all-time leading scorer. I could go on and on. But he's not like Mr. Invincible anymore, I don't think. He's going to get hurt. There are going to be some things that nag on him, I think, from here on out in his career. And same with Anthony Davis. So I hesitate to say I know they could get to the finals. Like it is in the realm of possibility.
Right.
But for now, I'm going to say they get to their ceiling right now, realistically, is they get to the Western Conference Finals and they take that series pretty deep. And if they do that, who else would you want in a game 6 or 7 over Western Conference Finals? Maybe other than the guys that Golden State has, than LeBron James and Anthony Davis.
I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find anybody else
Right.
above him on that list. You really would. I 100% hear what you're saying, and I agree with you. I think I would probably backtrack on what I said with them winning the West. I think that's probably too tall a task at the moment, considering this is a team that was patchworked together at the trade deadline. It just doesn't feel real right now that they're playing such good basketball. I think that's kind of messing with me, and I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. I think the reality is this team hasn't been on the court together, and I think the real expectations will come in next season for the Lakers.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to start with you on all these because, it's been like a 2-week pause in my NBA watching the past couple weeks due to conference tournaments and March Madness. And you have a really good feel for all these teams. So I'm just going to start with you on all these. Let's talk about the Nuggets. They've hit their first real, somewhat rough patch of the season.
Right.
Your best and worst case scenarios right now for the Denver Nuggets.
Well, I think for the Nuggets, it's always going to be about how they can manage things on the defensive end. I think Jokic has proven that his style of offense translates to the playoffs, and the offensive engine skill set that he brings translates almost better in the playoffs when the game slows down and you're in a half-court setting. That's when he feels most comfortable breaking down defenses. But on the defensive end of the floor, that's always going to be where the questions lie. And over the course of the season, there were a lot of months where they were bottom 10 in defense, and there hasn't been one month the entire year where they were top half defensively. They got to, I think, 17th in defense in December, and that was the highest they had gotten to. And that's not to say it's all about the numbers, but I think you have to find some semblance of consistency defensively in order to be a championship team in the NBA. History tells us that in order to win a championship, you have to have a top 12, 13 defense. I think that's the cutoff. And that history tells us. But for the Nuggets, I think they can 100% win the West with where the West is at currently, with a lot of teams that, um, you know, I struggle to find a reason to trust them more than the Nuggets based on what they've shown us. Teams like the Clippers, teams like the Warriors at this point in the season. Um, so for the Nuggets, I think the ceiling is they win the West, and in the finals, it would be really tough to win a series considering who the top three in the East are, and those teams would be the Celtics, the Bucks, and the Sixers, and in any three of those matchups in a theoretical final series, I I would find it hard to pick the Nuggets over those teams. I would be interested to hear your thoughts on that. But to me, it just comes down to and it's not just Jokic, by the way. I'm not ragging on Jokic's defense. I think it's kind of overblown. I think for me the problem is there are three entry points that are their three like best offensive players, so they're going to be on the court a lot. Jamal Murray, Michael Porter Jr., and Nikola Jokic. Those three are going to be on the court a lot, and whenever you can have a big guard and just back down Jamal Murray in the post and force the opposing team to double, then the defense is just going to be in rotation, and then you can find those advantages. And it's just going to be impossible to get stops from that point. So I think it's hard for me to say that they could beat any of those three East teams.
Yeah, I actually agree with you. I think that the conversation about the Nuggets defensively is interesting because prior to this past week that we just had, I believe they were making some strides on the defensive end of the floor. But they've sort of regressed back to the way they were before the past week, and it hasn't necessarily been to what you would say is like fantastic competition either. Um, they, lost to the Spurs, getting outscored 80-54 over a 26-minute stretch. They got outscored. A Nets team that will probably be in the playoffs, or at least in the playing tournament, but 48-23 over the final 15-30 of the third and fourth quarters, and 66-39 over the final 23 minutes against the Bulls last Wednesday. They've regressed in some areas defensively, and that's certainly somewhere where you worry about them just a little bit come the playoffs. But as you said, I mean, with their offense, and as long as Michael Porter Jr. and Jamal Murray are on the court, I believe that they have enough offense in the brilliance of Jokic offensively, especially what he does in orchestrating their offense, not just scoring the ball, but getting other guys involved, making everyone else better as that force multiplier. And there aren't a whole lot of those right now in the NBA. I mean, there's probably 5 or 7 guys that you can say are like in that category, just off the top of my head. I do believe, and I think you made a great point. Like, there's nobody right now in the West, aside from maybe a healthy Phoenix, but I'm not even sure we can say that because we just haven't seen a whole lot of that yet.
Right.
That, and maybe like a Golden State, if they really turn it on, that you can say is like definitively better than this Nuggets team. And they still have that 3.5 game lead over the Sacramento Kings for the number 1 seed. So they're most likely, barring another week or two of a collapse here, going to remain in that number 1 seed and have the home court advantage throughout the playoffs. I still think that their best case scenario is getting out of the West. I absolutely agree, but those 3 teams in the East are no joke. Like, you can make the argument those are the best 3 teams in the league. And a team we're going to talk about next, Philadelphia, you can make the argument they're the best team in the NBA since Christmas.
Right.
So let's go there real fast or real quick. What in your opinion? What is the worst case scenario for Denver?
To me, the worst case scenario would be you match up with the Warriors in the first round. The Warriors end up in the 8th seed. You end up in the 1st seed. You match up with the Warriors in the first round, and I think the matchup problems that the Warriors specifically present are scary for the Nuggets. And that's not to say that I wouldn't, pick the Nuggets to win that series. I absolutely would, based on what we've seen this season. But at the same time, um, being a team that relies on drop coverage, relies on hedging and recovering against a team that moves the ball as well as Golden State and a team that has the shooting to punish drop coverage as much as Golden State does, I just think that's a very scary matchup. So to me, that's probably their floor. Their floor, if they don't end up facing the Warriors in the first round, to me would be um, losing in the second round.
Yeah, I agree with you. So let's move on to our next team. That'd be the Philadelphia 76ers, who, as I said, you can make a definitive argument, and I wouldn't argue with you that they have been the best basketball team overall since about Christmas time, or at least the new year. Um, and what Joel Embiid continues to do, I think, has elevated him. And this is a separate conversation, so I won't, drag us off topic, but has elevated him possibly above Jokic in this MVP discussion. The numbers he's been putting up, the sheer numbers he's been putting up, with the production that they're getting out of Tyrese Maxey, the Harden that we've seen over the past month or so has been fantastic. I think that trio right there is good enough to get them to at least the Eastern Conference Finals, excuse me. And I think they absolutely have the team that can get to the finals. I think that the McDaniels kid that they brought in at the trade deadline has given them some more versatility in what they can do. I think he's a really good energy guy, pretty good defensively, um, pretty good, rebounding. They have shooters. Maxey's comes to mind. Uh, you know, the Tobias Harris experiment still continues to be somewhat interesting, but I do think this is a team that can absolutely get to the finals at their ceiling, because Embiid in any playoff series, unless he's going up against like a Giannis or maybe, I mean, outside of Giannis at this point, like, will probably be the best player on the court in a playoff series. What do you think, though?
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I mean, I think this Philly team can legitimately win the title.
Yeah,
Um, and it's really tough because of how top heavy the East is. If you're in the 3 seed, you're going to be facing a gauntlet to get to the finals. There's no question about it. But to me, I just wanted to address just how just how much this team looks different to me. And there's no numbers to really back this up. I just think they're big games this year. Um, facing the Celtics, facing, the Jokic's of the world. In years past, it's felt like this Philly team has kind of backed down in the face of adversity. And this year, that just has not been the case. I just think Joel Embiid has a different type of determination about him this year, and he's playing with a certain level of physicality that we just have not seen from him in years past. Whether that be because of maybe a lack of confidence in his body, his ability to hold up to that level of physicality he wanted to play with, or whatever the case would have been. I just think, barring health, Joel Embiid is probably the best player in the East, and that's really tough because of how good Giannis is. But I'd be hard pressed to find a player who can affect the game as much as Joel Embiid can, just because of his shooting ability and what that brings, as well as his ability to dominate the paint.
Yeah, I mean, he's unreal. Um, he's a joy to watch, and it seems like he's gotten to a point in his career where he's like playing fairly consistently. He's doing what his team needs him to do in the biggest games, making huge shots in crunch time. Like, he is the guy right now in that city, and I think that this team could absolutely win a title if they get out of the Eastern Conference, which I think they can. Um, Now maybe there is, like, some psychological roadblock that they have to get past because, you still have the Boston Celtics, you still gotta get over that hump, and you still gotta go probably through Milwaukee, and Giannis. So the road to get there is not going to be easy by any stretch of the imagination. But the way that this Philly team has played and their resilience this year, I think is their toughness and resilience mentally, just like to come back in all of these games, like post All-Star break and win these games down the stretch, and recover after some not so great losses as well. I think it's a little bit different than years past. It just feels different with the Sixers. But we'll see where that goes. We are 42 minutes in. Let's quickly go to the Knicks. What do you think about the Knicks? What is their best and worst case scenario?
Yeah, the Knicks are super interesting. I was hesitant to believe in what they were doing in New York. I'm not gonna lie, and I don't know if that was a just me being salty that they took Jalen Brunson from my Mavericks or whatever the case was. I just think now it's gotten to the point where, okay, they've been doing this for a certain amount of time to where you can't really doubt it anymore. Like, this is for real. Their defense is completely legitimate. Um, I think the difference with the Knicks this year compared to when they were in the 4 seed in 2021 is that high level point guard play, for one,
Yeah.
and the shooting they have around Julius Randle and Jalen Brunson. This time around, having guys like Emmanuel Quickly being in his third year now, um, and having more experience and knowing what they did wrong last time, because these players are self-aware. They know that they were dominated by that Hawks team. I think this time around, this Knicks team will really buckle down defensively. I think that's obviously their calling card, but their elite defense in the playoffs is going to present a lot of problems for teams that um, maybe people are going to be surprised by when it comes.
Yeah, and believe it or not, the Knicks have actually been overall a slightly better team without Jalen Brunson, at least recently. In terms of their net rating, they're plus 2.8 points per 100 possessions, and you know, with Jalen Brunson off the floor, barely better, but I mean, it's saying something that they've played this well, regardless, without him. And you mentioned it, like their defense has been really, really good. And having the amount of shooting that they have around Julius Randle, who looks more like the Julius Randle that we saw in 2021 as opposed to the Julius Randle that we saw last year.
Right.
Having, Josh Hart, bringing him over at the trade deadline, I think that's a fantastic move.
Right.
Having Quickly, who, to be honest with you, has been, I think, one of the better stories in the NBA this year. Like, he's finally figuring things out. He was a guy that had a lot of talent coming out of Kentucky. I watched him in college. He's got some special traits to him. And then, having guys that can also defend, I think, multiple positions, like, Jericho Sims comes to mind, his defensive versatility. Even, having a guy like Quentin Grimes, who's just like a big physical body, can shoot the ball some, played at Houston under a really good coach in Kelvin Sampson. Like, these are guys that are dogs. And so I think, overall, I like the skeleton of this Knicks roster more than I ever have, even compared to that 2021 team. And so I think the versatility, the shooting, and their defense could potentially get them, I believe, to like a. What do you think? What round would be like a? I mean, they're sitting in the 5 seed. They're 42-30. What do you think would be like a realistic expectation if you're a Knicks fan?
Well, I think if you're a Knicks fan, you'd like to believe that you could get to the Eastern Conference Finals. But from my perspective, and seeing what the Bucks have been doing, which is a team we're not going to cover tonight, but it's worth saying they're looking like the favorite to win the title as of right now. Um, Having to face them in the second round, I think, is a extremely tall task. And just me even saying they could take it to 6 games feels like a bit of a stretch. And that's not even me knocking the Knicks. It's just me acknowledging just how good that Bucks team is.
Right. Yeah, I would probably have to agree with you. Let's This is going to be a longer episode, but that's okay. Let's talk about the Clippers real fast. Um, what do you think overall, just real fast, best and worst case scenario for a really interesting situation with the Clippers?
Well, um, it's been very up and down this year for the Clippers. It's been weirdly um, uncommitted defensively at times. Um, at times great on offense. At times not so great on offense. It's been moments of brilliance on both sides of the ball, but they just haven't quite put things together as a whole unit quite yet. But at the same time, though, saying all that, it's just the theory of having Paul George and Kawhi Leonard on the court together with elite shooting still excites me. Even after 4 years of this experiment, it still intrigues me the fact that you can have two elite defenders on the court, um, one of them being one of the best of all time at that, um, and then surround them with shooting, and in order to try to win a championship. I think this team, I think this far into the experiment, it would be really hard to overcome um, some of the deficiencies they've ran into. I think, for one, I think this team lacks rim protection. Bringing in Mason Plumlee was a you know was a good move, but he doesn't solve their rim protection problem. And Zubac is a okay rim protector, but he also has mobility problems as well. So I think that part of the equation hasn't really been solved yet. They've added more shooting, added Russell Westbrook, but I think the rim protection thing is still their bugaboo. When teams get to the rim, they just don't have anybody there that can make them think about it a little bit. Another thing is the mental part of things. This Clippers team, there's just something about them, and there's not anything I can really say to back this up. But other than what we saw in that Maverick series in 2021, it just never really felt like you got Kawhi and Paul George clicking at the exact same time. So there still feels like there's potential that's yet to be unlocked there. And I'm starting to question if it can be unlocked, if maybe it's just not a very compatible duo. But I think now that they've added Russell Westbrook, I think he's the best point guard they've had since they've brought in Kawhi and Paul George. So I'm intrigued. I'm interested to watch what will happen, but I think the ceiling as of right now, I would say, is the Western Conference Finals, and then the floor would be they don't put things together and their defensive struggles come back to bite them, and they lose in the first round.
Yeah, I ultimately agree with you. I mean, you basically hit on everything. I think the point that you brought up about um or lack of rim protection in some respects is a fantastic point. Look, when you have two guys on the court, the caliber of a Paul George and a Kawhi Leonard, who typically in his career has elevated come the playoffs, and that's something that you can get excited about if you're a Clippers fan. But I just think that, as you said, there are just so many like roadblocks that they would have to overcome. Uh, you know, this far into the experiment to get past anywhere, past the Western Conference Finals. And I think a lot of it is going to be matchup dependent. Um, so I do ultimately agree with you. And it's not to, just agree to agree. I think we're both on the same page on a lot of these teams. So I think that, you know, we can circle back around to our Western Conference Finals tiers and Eastern Conference Finals tiers right before the playoffs start, potentially. Um, but the NBA playoff race is definitely heating up. I'm going to get back to watching some NBA this week in the time that we have between, the round of 32 and the Sweet 16. We have like 3 or 4 days. So we'll definitely be talking about the NBA in the next 2 weeks or so. There's an MVP awards conversation to be had. Now, since I wanted to start tonight's episode with Texas, because it's huge, it's a huge night. And for the next couple days, I'm definitely going to be celebrating this win. And if you're a Longhorns fan and you don't, I know this is sort of like a shameless plug. If you don't follow me on Twitter, I think you should, because I tweeted out tonight that at this point that the basis of the tweet is that Rodney Terry, how does he not get the job at this point? We had originally planned though an MLB under 25 years old draft because there's so much young talent in baseball right now. But since I started with the Texas Sweet 16 stuff, I think it makes more sense if we just, with the last like 15 or 20 minutes that we have here on episode 157 of the Raw Prospect podcast, to just continue with reaction from today's episode and continue with the theme of reaction, from March Madness, since we did a reaction to round one earlier today. So we will do that baseball under 25 draft, but I want to give Emmy some more time to like read up on some of these players, and we can have a more extensive conversation at that point. Does that sound good to you?
Yeah, that sounds perfect. I think with all the stuff that's happened today in college basketball, I think it's worth diving into a little bit.
Okay, so Saturday March Madness reaction. We reacted to the first round, so if you want to catch our reactions from that, be sure to go check out our Twitter account, uh, our YouTube under the live section, or these episodes will be on audio sooner rather than later, as soon as we can get them up on all platforms. be sure to like and subscribe, as we will be doing some more promotion on social media, on our Instagram account, and on Twitch as well. And we'll have some more Patreon content for you guys early this coming week. 2 episodes in one day is commitment. I have to say, we got to pat ourselves on the back for that.
For sure.
But it's a busy time of year. So that was a great NBA discussion. I thoroughly enjoyed that. That's a segment that we should do more often. Best and worst case scenario. And we can do that in other sports too. But games that happened today. We can circle back around to the Texas discussion. I think there's certainly more that I could say there, but I will be, certainly diving more in depth in that discussion this week on the Longhorn Deep Dive for sure. But just your other reactions to games you watched today. Where do you want to go first?
I think the most obvious one I look at is Princeton.
Yeah.
Getting to the Sweet 16, that's no small feat. You're able to say we were one of the best 16 teams in college basketball.
Right.
And for a Ivy League school, for a 15 seed, that's incredible. That's just incredible. The thing I thought about while watching that game was, Missouri didn't really have the interior presence to, really use their athleticism to their advantage. And what I mean is just a big man to really run the floor and put pressure on the rim a little bit. Missouri likes to take a lot of jump shots, and that's okay. You got to stick with what you do. But at the same time, for that particular matchup, I think it would have been better for them to attack the rim a little bit more. I'd be interested to hear what you think, though.
Yeah, I mean, first thing, are we seeing a trend now in college basketball with the transfer portal, NIL, the way that I think the playing field has leveled itself a little bit? I think the middle class in college basketball has gotten better.
Yep.
And so that is why we are seeing, I think, a lot of these upsets more frequently, especially with 15 seeds. I mean, this is the third consecutive year that a 15 seed has made the Sweet 16. Oral Roberts 2 years ago, and then last year St. Peter's, and they went to the Elite Eight. But now, if you're Princeton, you're in an elite club. Like when we talk about Ivy League, and it's an interesting league because it's the smallest league of all the 32, conferences that get automatic bids for winning their conference tournaments and get automatic bids for the NCAA tournament. It's the smallest league of all of them. Only 8 teams in the Ivy League. You are only the fourth team in Ivy League history to get to the Sweet 16. Cornell was the last team to do it back in 2010. So, I mean, this Princeton team, they're just smart. They know what they're doing. Like, you don't watch Princeton against Arizona or today against Missouri, teams that definitely have more talent, more athleticism, and all that stuff, right? And say, man, this Princeton team just doesn't belong on this basketball court. And they don't, like, you don't ever watch them and say, this team does not know what they're doing. They're sound with the basketball. They take care of it.
Absolutely.
They're not overly reliant on any one like aspect of the game. I think they have guys who are aggressive, physical on the interior, and guys that can shoot it every once in a while. They are right now like cooking with fish grease, to be honest with you. I mean, they beat a really good Missouri team today, and they beat them soundly. Like, there wasn't a point in that game, aside from maybe the start of the game, which I didn't really watch, that you said, like, Princeton, like, Missouri's going to come back and win. Like, Princeton was firmly in control from basically start to finish.
Right.
And they led by as much as like 21 points. So I think that right now, if you look at the draw, And this is what the South region, which has been, a region that at the beginning of the tournament we said is going to be a brutal region, right? Um, you set yourself up with a matchup against Baylor or Creighton. Now that could be tough for Princeton, but with what they've proven so far, I mean, who's going to doubt them at this point, right? I don't think they're going to get to the Final Four. Let's slow down on that just a little bit. But this is a team that's confident, and there's no one area on the basketball court, even though they don't have the athleticism that I think they're eventually going to run into. Um, there's no one area that you say, like, oh man, that's really going to hurt them, right? They're just so smart. They take care of the basketball, and they're playing well right now. And you got to give credit to whoever that coach is. I mean, he's done an amazing job. So Princeton is absolutely the Cinderella team of this tournament, along with, of course, we talked about earlier, Fairleigh Dickinson, the second 16 seed to ever win. What else stood out to you today? Was there anything aside from Texas and um, Princeton? Anything else?
Well, I think of the Kansas game. Um, I caught bits and pieces of this game. I tuned in the last about 5 minutes or so of this game, and man, that Arkansas team I believe made it to the Elite Eight last year, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
Yeah, they're battle tested. You could tell they were not in any shape or form intimidated by playing a 1 seed. They stepped on that court and took it to Kansas a little bit. Physically speaking, just shot making ability, it was all there. Like there was no talent discrepancy on that floor whatsoever. I think this night in particular, Arkansas probably could beat most teams in the tournament, and that's I don't say that lightly.
Yeah. This is an Arkansas program that's really elevated itself into like almost, I think they need a Final Four to officially enter, like a Final Four appearance to officially enter the conversation. But when we talk about like blue bloods, there are established blue bloods in college basketball, right? Duke, Kentucky, North Carolina, Kansas, right? And then I think we have a group of 5 or 6 teams that we can officially say are like new bloods. Like they are established presences every year in college basketball. They're getting top seeds. They're getting themselves to the Final Four. Oh, and you have to include UCLA in the blue blood discussion as well, right? But then you have these new blood programs like the Gonzagas of the world. Um, you know, uh, I think you would put maybe um, I don't know, like Houston in that conversation as well. They've gotten to a Final Four. What they're doing with Kelvin Sampson, even when they don't play their best, they're in that conversation. Uh,
Tennessee,
yeah, Tennessee as well under Rick Barnes. I mean, Baylor even under Scott Drew. I mean, they've been here, done that, won a national championship. You have those established blue bloods, and then you have these new bloods. I think Arkansas can officially enter themselves into that exclusive group if they were to get to the Final Four. And the draw is setting up fairly well for them. I think, it's still going to be tough, right? I mean, you're going to have to beat either UConn or St. Mary's. I think UConn's probably the scarier matchup. And then if you get past that, you're talking about maybe a UCLA or Gonzaga, but that's a UCLA team that's banged up. They have some injuries, and they can still get to the Final Four, I believe. Or maybe like a Gonzaga, right? But I think this Arkansas team, the point being is they've been in the Elite Eight 3 consecutive, or could be in the Elite Eight for a third consecutive year, as they've been to the Elite Eight the past couple years. This is their third year in a row under Eric Musselman, who I believe right now has to be considered a top 8 coach in college basketball. I mean, you have the top guys, right? I mean, Bill Self, I mean, based on his track record, I still think you have to put Calipari up there. Like, you just can't ignore the amount of success that he's had.
Right.
You have those guys, Scott Drew, Tony Bennett, the list goes on and so forth. But I think Eric Musselman absolutely has to be in that conversation. In this Arkansas team, they have athletes, and they kind of remind me of those Florida State teams of old under Leonard Hamilton. With all that athleticism and shooting, they are dangerous. And that's a team that a lot of these teams in the tournament probably can't match up with athletically. And Nick Smith Jr., his return, they didn't necessarily, play as well coming down the stretch when he returned from injury. They sort of had to incorporate him back into the offense, back into the flow of things. But with Jared Walsh and with all the guys that they have, it's hard to match up. They're a hard matchup, and they defend at a pretty high level as well with their length. So Arkansas is certainly a really intriguing team, and I think at this point, the West region. I mean, you talk about the East region. Purdue is out. Um, Duke is out. You still have Marquette, Michigan State, Tennessee. You still have Alabama in the South with Creighton and Baylor, and you still have Houston and Texas in the Midwest. But I think at this point, the matchups that we could get in the West region with like an Arkansas against a UConn and maybe like a Gonzaga against the UCLA, probably the most fascinating to me of all the Sweet 16 matchups that we could see, just because of like the dynamics that could, arise out of those games. And one thing I'll say is I think we saw the importance of Bill Self to the Kansas program tonight. And I don't want to take anything away from what their interim coach or their acting head coach did, their assistant that took over in Bill Self's absence. I think he did a pretty good job. And they did get Kevin McCullough back tonight, but I don't think he was 100%. And I think that showed at times. But I think, the importance of having a guy like Bill Self, who I think right now is at the top of the college basketball world when it comes to coaches. I think they missed his presence tonight, making those in-game adjustments. That's what he does. That's what Bill Self does. He's the best. And so I think they missed that tonight, and I think his importance just really showed. And I think the pressure got to them a little bit. When you're the
Yeah,
defending champion. Go ahead.
no, sorry.
Well, I think we lost Emmy. I'm not sure quite what happened, but I guess I will text him and see. But as I was saying, Kansas, I think they missed Bill Self's presence just a little bit tonight. That was pretty obvious. And when you're not getting the type of production that you necessarily need from DeJuan Harris Jr. as that veteran point guard, that sort of stabilizing force, it is what it is. And I think the pressure of having that target on your back after winning a national championship got to them a little bit. It was absolutely, but you're Kansas, you'll reload, you'll come back stronger next year. So, congratulations to Arkansas. That was absolutely a game that stood out today on the slate. I guess the other conversation that we could have before we wrap things up, and let me just real fast text Emmy to see what happened. I think the other conversation that we could have is Duke. Duke was a very popular pick to go very far in the tournament. Elite Eight, Final Fours. You had some people picking them to get to the championship game and potentially even win it. I had them in my Final Four. But I think you saw sort of the things that come into play when you have those freshmen all playing at the same time in the tournament. And you got to give credit to Tennessee. Duke was a team that down the stretch of the season was winning because of their length and their defense, really packing it in defensively and not allowing teams to get into the paint and making it hell for them once they got into the paint, using their length and athleticism to get out in transition. Tyrese Proctor, Dariq Whitehead, his ability to shoot the ball. Jeremy Roach was really the only veteran presence at the point guard position, but he came on hot late. And really Filipowski, the difference maker on the interior. I think that it showed a little bit when you matched up with a team in Tennessee that was missing their point guard and has been missing their point guard now for a couple weeks since Zakai Ziegler, who tore his ACL. Hopefully he comes back stronger next year. Look, give credit to Tennessee. They did what they wanted to do with Josiah Jordan James. Santiago Vescovi was fantastic once again, knocking down shots. They out physical Duke. They really gave Duke a taste of their own medicine in some ways. And they brought it from the jump. And I think this is a key win for Rick Barnes in the Tennessee program, a program that, let's be honest, the past couple years has underachieved in March. And now they get to the second weekend. They beat a really hot Duke team. And now things sort of open up a little bit if you're Tennessee, because now in the Sweet 16, hold on, Emmy just wrote me back. Now in the Sweet 16, you're going to get to play either FAU or Farley Dickinson. And that's no slight at either of those programs. But let's just be honest. I mean, that's probably, if you ask Tennessee as a program who they would want to face in the Sweet 16 out of the 4 teams in that mini sub-region, I think they would have taken that. And with their size and their physicality, I think they're a tough matchup. And it's a good day, I think, overall for Texas, their program. And we'll see what happens with Shaka Smart tomorrow in the round of 32. But he finally got off the schneid, so to speak, winning, his first round game against Vermont. He's done a fantastic job this year at Marquette. Tyler Kolek is, at this point, a top 5 point guard in college basketball. And they got some guys on that team. And I think if they get past Michigan State, it is like an all-time weekend for the Texas program, in that your former coach, Shaka Smart, got to the Sweet 16, got his first 2 tournament victories. Rick Barnes got to the Sweet 16 and could potentially, with how the draw is setting up, could get to the Elite Eight, maybe even the Final Four with the way that Tennessee team plays. And then Texas, with what they have achieved so far, not getting ahead of ourselves, but this stepping stone victory, I think, getting to the Sweet 16 for the first time in 15 years. It's a big night and a big weekend for the history of Texas basketball overall. It's former, friends and counterparts, former coaches, and the current situation with Rodney Terry. And so Tennessee was the other standout team today. But San Diego State, man, they will be a tough matchup for Alabama. They will not be an easy, the way that San Diego State likes to play, mucking it up defensively, really hard to score against, especially on the perimeter. I think that contrast of styles facing Alabama, even though Alabama will still have the better team and the better talent on the court, and Brandon Miller, the best player in college basketball, San Diego State will not go down easy in that game. I'm telling you right now, they got some guys. They are the best team in the Mountain West. They have been for like the past 5 years, and it will that will be a fascinating game in a sense that those are teams with contrasting styles, like truly contrasting styles. And I think if San Diego State can turn them over a little bit, maybe put some pressure on them, stay within reach late in the game, there's no telling what San Diego State could do. I'd still pick Alabama to win the game, but they were the other standout team that, could have slept on Furman a little bit. But I think they showed that they're a lot better than Virginia was or even a Furman was, and they are going to be a team that could give Alabama a little bit of trouble, I believe, in the Sweet 16 matchup. So, I mean, that's really it. I'm not sure if he's having trouble rejoining. We'll give him a couple more minutes to rejoin and give his final thoughts. I guess we'll circle back around to where we started, and that is Texas Sweet 16. It's just such a big night that I can't talk about it enough. We'll wrap up here in the next 5 to 10 minutes. Let me take a sip of my water. And it really comes down to three things. Number one, Dylan Disu. Like, as I said in the beginning, what a performance. Like, that is a performance as a Texas fan. 28 points and 10 boards on 14 of 20 shooting. Most of that damage done in the paint and, from the mid range, which he is deadly from about that 10 to 12 foot range with that little one-handed push shot or floater. I'm not sure what you would particularly call it. It's sort of unique in a way. I haven't really seen that a whole lot, but he is fantastic at it from both sides. In the way that he is just asserting his presence on the glass, getting physical and posting up guys when he has a size advantage and going to work in the paint. That is an aspect that this Texas team did not have consistently for much of the season. And so, they got it at times, but they didn't have that guy consistently. And I sort of make an analogy to like in the NBA, when you acquire a guy, maybe not like an all-star level guy, but a guy that changes the dynamic of your team at the trade deadline. Maybe he's close to an all-star caliber player, and he just changes the dynamic of your team at the trade deadline and improves your team's chances of getting far in the playoffs and maybe even winning a championship. I think when you look at what Disu has given you the past 2 weeks or so, averaging 18 points and 9 rebounds, that is like second team All-American caliber play from your best front court player that I think Texas didn't really foresee coming in. I mean, Disu was a guy that they got in the transfer portal from Vanderbilt last year, but he was coming off a bad injury. He did lead the SEC in rebounding one year. They got him in the transfer portal. They knew he was a guy that, could be something like this and help this team win, and he has throughout the season. He's shown flashes, but last year he didn't really make an impact until late, and it wasn't nearly the impact that he's making now. He's just doing everything, and he's gotten to the level now where the past 5 or 6 games he has been the best player on the entire floor. And of all the Texas seniors, Serge Jabari Rice, Marcus Carr, Timmy Allen, Christian Bishop, Disu's the only one with eligibility remaining. If he wanted to come back, he could for one more year. And so that's certainly right now an interesting conversation. It's hard within a span of a couple weeks to really elevate your draft stock to the point where you are like getting first round looks or even high second round looks. I don't think Dessou was even on NBA teams' radars like before a couple weeks ago. And that's no offense to Dylan Dessou, but that's an interesting conversation. If Texas goes even further in this tournament and Dylan Dessou has performances like that, it like the conversation of whether or not he will come back or maybe potentially enter his name in the draft could get very interesting. But that was an all-time performance. And then lastly, I had doubts about Texas if they eventually like went cold from 3-point range. Tonight they did not shoot the three ball well. Against Colgate, they sort of out Colgated Colgate, if that makes sense. Colgate was a team that came into the tournament as statistically, like percentage wise, the best 3-point shooting team in the tournament. And Texas made an emphasis to really guard Colgate, run them off the 3-point line. And they did a fantastic job of that. And they knocked down their threes. I mean, Sir'Jabari Rice knocked down 7 himself in that first game against Colgate on Thursday. And Marcus Carr got involved. There were some other guys that knocked down threes as well. But, Tyrese Hunter should be included in that conversation too. But, I think not having the 3-point shot fall tonight and still being able to find other ways to win. And again, this is where Dessou and their improved consistent play on the interior comes into the conversation, even with a guy like Timmy Allen. At times, like having that reliable presence on the interior and being able to play inside, go inside when you absolutely need a bucket, having a guy that can do that is humongous when the 3-point shot is not falling. It takes so much pressure off of Marcus Carr, off of Sir'Jabari Rice, off Tyrese Hunter. And even the freshman who comes into the game off the bench, who's been fantastic, at least at defending on the wing, in Arterio Morris, a guy who I think is going to be a really good player next year for Texas, with an entire summer to work on his game and really work alongside Tyrese Hunter. Look, I think that finding a way to win, not shooting the ball well at all from 3-point range is a humongous hurdle that Texas had to overcome at some point in this tournament. And I think for Texas fans, that's a really good sign that they won this game and they got outshooted from 3 by a really good Penn State team. That was one of the hottest teams in the country coming into tonight. Like, that is huge. And so I'll have more on that on my Longhorn deep dive later this week as we enjoy this victory. Don't take it for granted. And we start to look forward to the Sweet 16 Tuesday or Wednesday, as Texas will play on Friday in Kansas City, a place where they just were, and they won the Big 12 tournament, so there has to be some comfort in that. But what a historic night. I'm so excited. This was a great episode. I'm probably just going to wrap it up right here, right now. Amy can give his thoughts on anything beyond this in our next episode. So, thank you guys for tuning in. For the one person that is watching here at 1:22 a.m. Central Time, we really appreciate you. Spread the word to anyone who likes sports. We are trying to grow this podcast, and there's so much going on right now. We do have a Patreon, and it is free right now, so go check that out. We will be putting content on that side of things this week. And we're typically at this rate going 1 or 2 episodes a week, and they're typically live streams. So you can catch them on our Twitter feed, and we'll be posting them eventually, their audio soon after, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you like to listen to podcasts. So check out our episode from earlier, our first round reaction, and then this episode as well. Thank you guys for tuning in. We really appreciate that. And I guess just like Texas's 15-year Sweet 16 drought, we are going, gone. Peace out, y'all. Hook 'em horns.